Sundays. I didn't. That was Joshua. Joshua came up with that one. How you doing, Watson?
Uh it's a really interesting time right now. Not to get too personal right away, but my mother-in-law is dying. She's kind of been doing this for the past decade, but now it seems like it's really quite close to the end of things, I'm afraid. And so it was so serious that my wife Beth actually went back to Phoenix really recently. So I've just been alone here with the kids and trying to take care of household stuff and falling behind on emails as always. So so it's kind of
Oh, I'm sorry to
been
hear
doing a
that,
lot
Watson.
of programming and stuff, a lot of coding. So I've been keeping myself busy, but it's so that's kind of what's been happening on that front. I'm just gonna correct my camera there. Looks like it's a little,
Correct your camera. All
I
right.
don't know, it looks a little lopsided, but I can't quite fix it. So this will have to do.
That's true. Your bookshelves look like they're like.
Yeah, I know. I don't quite understand, but
Although, like, I'm one to talk.
right.
My camera's straight, and it still looks like a mess behind me.
Yeah,
Well,
I'll have to fix
yeah.
that later.
Well, my condolences to Beth.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah. No, it's so that's
it's
what's
the
going on.
right. No, it's. I mean, it is the threshold, isn't it? I mean, there's two kinds of people in the world: those whose mothers are alive and those who aren't.
Yeah.
It's a major thing. And of course, I mean, rough as it is, it's the natural order of things.
No, absolutely.
It's supposed to go this way as opposed to Beth going before her. So
Right. Well, and it wasn't like, we didn't see this coming, and we've been doing,
right.
we knew that this was going to happen. Almost about 8 years ago, actually, we sort of first learned about the diagnosis, and
Mhm.
we knew this eventually would come. I always
Right.
figured that Saturn opposing her moon from the 8th house would likely be sort of the time frame, and that turns out to be the case. So
Okay.
in any case, how are you doing, Nick?
Well, better than you, apparently. Just equivocally. Yeah, no, I've been keeping busy, and very busy week. My wife and stepkids have gone back to South Africa for a while, so I'm also on my own and missing my family. But it's the way things have to be for now. She
Yeah.
has business to attend to back there. So keeping busy and working on stuff, and excited for this episode despite our rather somber entrance.
Right. So we figured we would actually try to go through what Venus retrograde means in the 12 houses. Now, in doing a lot of kind of the research for this, to sort of find succinct examples, and in just my own observations of Venus, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, Nick, that like although the house significations can be really important, there is a kind of extra zodiacal dimension to looking at Venus in this way, where it almost doesn't matter what sign it's in or what house it's happening in, that just the phase itself has a kind of significance of its own that doesn't necessarily need the frame of reference of the zodiac or the houses. That it is just a kind of chronometer, a timer, of
Mm.
social dynamics and the continuing development. What do you think of that?
No, I certainly agree. I mean, this is why I use the technique, especially in cases where I don't have a birth time to work with, where I am working sort of outside horoscopic astrology anyway. That being said, I think the examples we came up with today, most of which came from you, I threw in some as well. But the examples that we have today, I think, do a pretty good job of justifying themselves within their respective house systems.
Sure.
They each, some are a little more sort of convoluted because they have, well, not convoluted, but it has more to do with what planet happens to be in a house natally, or what other houses is that planet configured to, like that the a planet in a said house will be configured to planets in other houses, and they also speak for what's going on, the houses that are ruled by the planet in question. I mean, in this case, Venus. So
Yeah.
there's all that kind of stuff that comes into the picture with some of these examples. But all that being said, I think it's pretty clear
Yeah.
with what we're talking about today that you can use this within your horoscopic system.
Yeah, it's not that it's not relevant. It just sometimes it's if you're expecting it to always fit in the neat little box of the area of life, then you're not taking into account all of the different things that can sort of contribute to everything that it ends up being about for someone, and the ways that it changes from one iteration of a Venus retrograde cycle to the next. Yeah, having said that, though, I think these are still pretty good examples, and hopefully we can still extrapolate some kind of universal statements on each one that may even be able to apply to you when we get around to wherever the sign of Leo is in your natal chart. So shall we start with
With
house one?
house one, and get this jerk off out of the way. because
uh,
we
s-
because we know where we're going.
yeah. So obviously, if you're having Venus go retrograde in your first house, according to whole sign houses, we're mainly talking about people with Leo rising. So,
In this instance,
what
yeah.
can we say? What can we say in general about what it should mean? A sort of more universal statement of what Venus going retrograde in the first house should be. You've spoken about this before.
Yeah, well, I mean, you get the usual delineations for the ascendant, having to do with everything from appearance to environment to self-image, and different astrologers will emphasize one of those over the other. My main experience with the first house, it's even broader with that than those sort of descriptions. The ascendant, especially, yeah, the ascendant is like it's like where the book begins, where the story begins. And whenever Venus makes that 8-year return over the ascendant, it really has that sort of new chapter in a life feeling. There's that the person has, speak of the devil, crossed some kind of threshold that invokes like a new chapter in that person's life. And
So new
it's usually
personal
very,
eras.
yeah, new personal eras. And it can be it's typically really unambiguous to the person, like, oh yes, when you show them where the Venus retrograde transits in Leo have occurred and they're Leo rising, they go, oh yes. Those are, they recognize in their own lives how that's been this kind of new marker.
I would also say, I think that makes a lot of sense. I would also say that if Venus goes retrograde through your first house, that you're more likely to become a kind of agent of that transit, where you yourself may take on the kind of agency of Venus retrograde. So you may end up being kind of at the center of uh, where boundaries are being transgressed or progressed. In social relations, where you are the one pushing the boundaries, or you're the kind of at the center of the scandal or the story or whatever the sort of the development is.
Which brings
So
us to our first example.
sure, yeah, okay, yeah, okay. So let's get him out of the way then. So Donald Trump was born Leo rising.
Shall I? I've got the
Yeah,
slide. Shall I
okay,
show the
yeah,
slide?
good, good.
I don't have slides for all the stories we're covering today. I wanted to, but I just didn't have time. But I do have this guy. So yeah, he announced his candidacy on June 16th, before Venus retrograde happened. But the first debate, um, Venus went retrograde at 27 Leo in his first house. His ascendant, of course, is
29.
Whoops, have I gone the wrong way? No, I haven't gone the wrong way. Same old story. Um, there he is. Sorry. Yes, there's his ascendant at 29 Leo. So that Venus went retrograde in his first house. And there he was at this first debate. I already mentioned in a previous live stream that most of the people on the stage that night, Donald is not born during a red interval. He's not born during a Venus retrograde. But most of the people on the stage that night were born during red intervals, either during the actual Venus retrograde or close enough that it's part of like what I consider to be part of that that section of the cycle. So yeah, he got into an altercation with Megyn Kelly where they traded words, and it kept going on after the debate where he was trashing her and all this stuff. And she was born with a Venus retrograde,
Right.
and there were 10 contestants on the stage this first night. On the second debate, there were 11 contestants. Because Carla Fiorni joined the fray, but I think it's like out of the
Right.
11 candidates, seven of them were red interval births.
So the significance of this, I would think, is the idea, since you've said the Venus retrogrades at times of changing consensus. Yeah, we've already gone through all of these before in
Yeah,
previous live streams.
that's right.
We don't need to do that, but I think the significance of this is that it was a time of changing of social consensus, and Trump was at the center of that. That
Yeah.
he was also this person at that time who was breaking past these sort of norms and taboos of political discourse, of civil discourse, in a really bad way. That's just my personal take
Yeah.
on that, but and to the extent where even the other Venus retrograde people on the stage, are pushing back against it, but to no avail, because he was endearing himself to the portion of the electorate that he was appealing to. And Venus is charm, Venus is popularity typically. So doing this in a really remarkable way and in a kind of boundary crossing way, and not necessarily in a great way, but nonetheless being able to kind of benefit, from the projection of his own persona and character and image in that time as kind of the new point of social consensus among the GOP primary voters. So that's what I would think how I think it relates to the fact that it happened in this first house, that it was about the social consensus was being reorganized in his favor and around him.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that Jupiter was in Leo as he announced his candidacy, it went from Jupiter through to Virgo, from Leo through to Virgo over the course of that Venus retrograde. But the fact that Venus was accompanied by Jupiter in that instance speaks to how it was to his advantage at that particular time.
Right.
Because it's not going to be every Venus retrograde that is co-present with Jupiter. It did happen in 1991. But in 2015, that's what distinguished it, say, from 2007 or 1999.
Right.
And that was his behavior was Jupiterian. It was sort of like fearless, unapologetic. I mean, that's a great Jupiter keyword, just like
Bigly.
bigly. That's another great one. Yeah.
That's a very Jupiter word. Yeah. So I think so. That's how I think it applies to him, and that's one example of Venus going retrograde in the first house that I think makes a fair amount of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the data for the next person for the other?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got them all ready here.
Okay, good. So one example that I thought was really interesting, and this was when I was kind of stuck with me since I first noticed it way back in the day. But Vanessa Hudgens, the actress who's probably most known for her work in the High School Musical films. She was born, we have an A-rated time for her, and she was born with the ascendant in late Leo. And on September 6th, 2007, Venus was going retrograde through Leo in her first house. And this is when some nude photos of herself were leaked. They were stolen from her phone and they were leaked. And this was a really big controversy at the time because, for one, she was just 18. She'd like just, she was just barely an adult. And this happened while like right in the middle of her negotiations to star in like future films with Disney. And she was in this really kind of squeaky clean, kids movie franchise. So this was very, upsetting and traumatizing for her at the time, she said later. And very strangely as well, she felt like she had the need to kind of apologize in a way that the sort of media culture at the moment sort of reacted against. That was to blame her for having taken these photos instead of, assigning blame at the person who invaded her privacy like this. But I thought that was so interesting because, past that point, she was in a new era. She had this kind of social transgression committed against her that was about, revealing herself in a way that she did not intend, right? Naked photos. And this is sort of scandalous. So that's your Venus retrograde sort of component of this. But I think, this probably had, she probably remembers this as like the, the beginning of the sort of next era in her life as a person and as an actress. Interestingly, subsequent alignments of the Sun and Venus in Leo seem to have corresponded with her relationships. So I'm not sure exactly how that corresponds, but I know like she met Austin Butler in like the summer of 2011 is when they kind of came together, and then it was 8 years later in the summer of 2019 that they kind of drifted apart. But in any case, Venus retrogrades in the first house are like, times of social transgressions or the pushing of social boundaries, but connected with one's appearance and one's identity. Then I think, that's a pretty on the nose type of experience to have happened.
Sure. I mean,
There's
of
also
course,
Saturn as well.
right. I mean, within a few years, she was in things like Spring Breakers and what have you. So, I mean, there is this inevitable trajectory of Disney stars to when they turn adult, like in the 21st century, when they turn adult, they don't just sort of shed the squeaky clean image. They sort of actively seek out to sort of push back against it in
Right.
some way, or go to a different extreme. And yeah, even though this sort of happened accidentally and it wasn't engineered by her, in its own way, I think it helped usher her into that sort of post Disney part of her career, even though she wasn't quite ready to leave it then.
Right. One other thing I would want to say about her chart and Venus retrogrades in Leo is in August of 2015, she announced that her father, I guess, was dying of cancer. And what I thought was strange about that announcement is it was happening while Saturn was in late Scorpio in her fourth house. Her Venus, I believe, is at 26 or 28 degrees of Scorpio. And Saturn at that time of that announcement was right at 26 or 28 degrees of Scorpio in her fourth house of parents. And the reason why I think this is significant is because sometimes you can tell what topics a Venus retrograde will bring about based on the transits that are occurring to natal Venus. So in her case, in August of 2015, when she announced that her father was doing really badly, Saturn was conjunct her Venus in the fourth house. And so the Venus retrograde around her first house is when she sort of makes this announcement about her father.
Okay.
So that's another kind of technique that I haven't really seen many other people employ when trying to interpret the meaning of transits, is by looking at sort of what's happening to the natal.
You absolutely do. You absolutely do, because that also changes how Venus is going to manifest as a transiting planet, for sure.
Well, because I'd imagine someone would go, well, why didn't something like this happen in 2015 then. And the
You mean in
reason is
2007?
uh well the
Oh,
nude
you mean
the
the
leak was
nude photo? Oh, the
2007.
why I see. Yeah, I'm going backward on
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
You're
yeah.
asking
So
why didn't the leak happen in
right, that's what.
2015?
Yeah, I'm trying
Right,
to
right.
answer the a person's objection. Why wouldn't there have been a similar type of event in 2015 as there was in 2007? And I think the answer to that is that the different conditions of Venus and the other transcendental shots that have contributed to different experiences in 2015 versus um, 2007, but in a sort of predictable way.
Right.
We could see why and how that would have been different. Also, the Venus retrograde that occurred in Leo on her ascendant, that was in proximity to Saturn, which would just come off her first house. We don't know exactly when the photos were stolen, but I presume it probably happened during the time that Saturn was in her first house, because Saturn had just barely entered Virgo at the time of the leak. And in fact, probably the photos themselves were taken while Saturn was in her first house. So
Yeah.
interestingly, she has actually had other photos leaked in other years as well, and those also seem to have corresponded with transits in Leo. Um, there was a lunar eclipse actually across her first and seventh house axis at the release of another
Oh,
leak.
really?
Yeah, so there's, you know, it, um, I don't want anyone to come away with this thinking like, oh, this must mean leaks can only be described by Venus going retrograde in your first house. Like, no, there are other leaks that have happened without Venus being retrograde necessarily that have affected multiple people at the same time. There was a massive photo leak in 2014 that sort of
Mm,
has its own interesting astrological story. But
right.
in any case, so that's how it applies to Vanessa Hudgens. I think that's just really interesting that Venus station retrograde and went retrograde through her first house at the time of this invasion of her privacy.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent example. Um, all right. So let's go to the second example, also a good one. And just a moment here.
So I also try to think of things which were kind of current
Yeah.
or that people might know about. I'm not, I hope people don't think that from these examples that, I'm just like some kind of like celebrity obsessed person or just trying to find contemporary examples that people can relate to.
I know you're a
Um,
celebrity obsessed person.
I,
That's okay.
I'm-
Using,
I always get that. I always get that criticism when I use celebrities as examples, but I don't exactly know what they're expecting. Like, should I be using like higher brow examples then
no,
that
no, no.
less
These
people
are
will be
good.
familiar with?
No. These are good. I agree with your method. I was really grateful in preparing for this. I'm like, oh yeah, I should have Margot Robbie's chart in my database, and things like that. So um,
Yeah,
yeah, no. I think this is you got to make the content relatable.
sure.
So yeah, no, this is excellent. Let's talk about
So
Margot.
yeah, so Margot Robbie, if you don't know who she is an actress who's done very well for herself in the past few years. She comes from Australia. She's been on a pretty steady ascent since coming to the United States in 2011, which, for whatever it's worth, was the year of a blue five, when the
Yeah,
sun conjoined Venus in Leo, which maybe is a clue to the overall arc of the trajectory, but I don't know the exact dates on that, so I shouldn't say that. But in any case, you might have seen her at playing Harley Quinn in some of the DC movies. She's just about to play Barbie in the
right.
Barbie movie, which is being released just a few days from now.
And she played
And
Sharon Tate in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
oh, right. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, she's this actress who's doing very, very well for herself, and she actually received this distinction of being the highest paid actress in Hollywood last year, due to the salary that she's receiving for Barbie. Now, interestingly, she's not just playing Barbie; she's actually a producer on the film. It's actually
Hmm.
her. It's her production company that is producing this movie, Barbie, that's expected to do really, really well financially. And she started that in 2014 with her husband when Jupiter was in Leo. So I say all this to say that, she got an astonishing amount of money for playing this role already. But as the producer, she's probably also going to be due for earning residuals from the release of this movie, which depends on, the moment that actually comes out. So the movie Barbie is coming out with Venus retrograde in Leo, or just about to, on July 21st, and that will be happening in her second house of finances. So one of the things we might be able to say about Venus going retrograde in your second house is being able to kind of get a return on investments. She made this company while Jupiter was in Leo in her second house, and now Venus is going to be stationing retrograde in Leo in her second house, and she's going to be making this even larger amount of money from this movie now that it's finally come out. So I think that is fairly appropriate. All expectations are that this movie will do very well. The sort of early reviews of this movie seem to say it's very funny, very entertaining. I hope this doesn't sound like an ad for Barbie, but it's a little tricky because we're talking about something that hasn't quite happened yet, but is literally just about to. And, we can almost foresee that, the significance of this Venus retrograde is that she would be probably making just a crap ton from this. And actually, really interestingly, the director of the movie, Greta Gerwig, she was born on August 4th, 1983, which, Nick, is
Venus retrograde, red 5.
The same one from Leo. And interestingly enough, Greta Gerwig was confirmed to direct this movie in July of 2019, which, Nick, was
a blue 5.
Yeah,
which
was at the Sun Venus conjunction in Leo, basically, for people who aren't familiar with the intervals.
Here, I can quickly go to that. So yeah, sometime this month, 2019, August of 2019.
Yeah, that was kind of when the movie became sort of official, because she, I guess she had bought the rights from Mattel to make this movie back in like October, November of 2018, and that was when she was first being discussed to kind of star in it.
Oh,
and
so
of course, that was a
Venus retrograde.
Yeah, another Venus retrograde. Exactly. Yeah.
Down here at the IC.
Yeah. Now,
and it's funny, you said she moved to the US in 2011, and you thought that might be a blue 5. Being Australian, she might have left at the beginning of the year, which is their summer. And January 1st of 2011, like in January of 2011, was also coming out of a Venus retrograde in Scorpio just prior to that. So there might be also something to that.
True.
Yeah.
And of course, the fact that this huge movie is coming out that she is expected to make a ton of money from, it's also probably pretty good that she has Jupiter transiting right on her midheaven. It looks like just pretty extraordinary success, to me.
Yeah, big time. And her chart is really interesting. The Jupiter also trines this Neptune of hers, which like really compounds the Barbie element of all this. Her chart is really interesting in that like everything's really, the Mars in Aries in the 10th, and the Jupiter in Cancer on the ascendant, and the Saturn in Capricorn squaring the Mars, and the T square with the Jupiter, and they're all in rulership or dignity. And then there's that Scorpio moon that rules the ascendant, and then Venus is in the 12th in Gemini. And I have to wonder out loud. I don't have an answer, but I have to wonder like what is it about her 12th house that's being triggered by all this? Stuff.
That's interesting. She had said in an interview that she feels like even though she's been a film producer for about a decade now, that she still feels somewhat underestimated. And, part of that could just be, sort of garden variety sexism.
Yeah. She's a young blonde woman, so how could she possibly know what she's doing?
I think she's kind of being seen as like just an actress when she's actually, a multiple hat wearer. She's kind of a she's a pretty big deal. She's kind of got a lot going on for her, and in a weird way, she's like underestimated.
Yeah, I get that. I'm speaking of transits to the natal Venus. This Mars Saturn opposition is basically T-squaring that natal Venus of hers. And natally, she has this very strong Saturn-Mars square, right? Both of
Right.
them in their rulership.
Well, you
So
see Harley Quinn swing around that bat, and she seems to
right,
have
yeah,
some
right.
element of
But
the Mars Saturn.
but I think this is also sort of just, the fact that that she's not merely the star of the new Barbie movie, but the whole sort of the chief executive and the producer and
Yeah,
everything.
producer of it. Like she's
Yeah.
taken a lot. That's a lot of responsibilities to have for
Yeah.
one movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Excellent example.
yeah, so I
Excellent.
thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah, there
Yeah.
was some other interesting things about that too. In 2015, I guess that was when she was proposing a Harley Quinn standalone movie, which eventually became the movie Birds of Prey. And that was the movie that she made the most amount of money from prior to Barbie. She made about 9 or 10 million for that movie, but with Barbie, she made
Yeah.
12 million.
Right. And she'll
So
make a lot more than that. I mean,
yeah,
she'll
so
make a lot more than
yeah, so I mean, for anyone who's like Cancer rising watching this, I'm afraid that Venus retrograde in Leo probably isn't going to be like you making the millions
well,
like Margot Robbie, but
in your own way, you might be. It might be if it aligns. That the important thing is not. I mean, 1/12 of the population are Cancer rising.
right.
Not all of them are going to have that kind of windfall. A lot of it has to do, as we're illustrating, with other components in her chart and how the transits to her natal Venus impact things, and the fact that the transits to her Venus involve planets that are really strong in her natal chart, and all these components. So this is the point I make. I mean, the synodic cycle is great for when you have like no birth time and you gotta, you have limited information and you can sort of use it to go further. But even just in your regular horoscopic reading, understanding the cycle helps you put everything into context like this, and explain why she's having the windfall that she is.
Right. So what do you think we could say universally for Cancer risings who are going to have Venus go retrograde through the second house? What do you think? What is there something we can say that should be more broadly applicable?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's your resources, your property, the things that contribute to your identity. They're not specifically your identity, but they sort of contribute to. They're like adjuncts to your identity, like the amount of money you have and all this stuff. It's like it's the
Right.
and it's your baggage. So
I've
it's
also seen
your
people,
collateral and your
yeah,
value and all that stuff.
I've seen people like buy things that are like very precious to them during Venus going retrograde through the second house. Not specifically with Leo, but just in general. Like
Mm.
Venus retrogrades can be times of like really sort of important purchases and coming into property that means a lot to you in some respect.
Or you
So
can be like me with natal Venus in the second. Just every single day of my life is like, oh my God, there's something really important I want to buy.
right. So that's what I'd have to say about this Venus going retrograde in the second. Now, I was really trying to think about Venus going retrograde in the third, and it's kind of it's I don't know, to me that sort of feels like a really abstract combination. It's one I'm not like thinking about. It's not necessarily a particularly clear one. We know that the third is the house of sort of mental activities, traveling to a lesser
Mhm.
extent, education, localities, neighborhoods, transportation, siblings, relatives,
Sure.
one's local neighborhood or local community. So
I think of it as being the local house. It's the opposite of the ninth. It's like the parochial house, like a
yeah, it's kind
yeah,
of more like your local community versus like
the big outside world.
or
Yeah.
even the kind of sort of national or global versus local
Yeah.
and neighborly.
Yeah.
So with Venus going retrograde in the third house, I mean,
We should explain who Kim Davis is.
oh God. Yeah, so back in 2015, when gay marriage was legalized in the United States, um, this person, Kim Davis, she was she was like a clerk in uh, in Kentucky, and she basically refused to issue marriage licenses for gay couples. She was caught on camera in this like charged interaction where she like denied this gay couple from getting their marriage license, and so it went viral. And then she like this sort of became a bigger and bigger deal as more and more people started paying attention to this, as she just continued to refuse to do this. And then eventually she was jailed at the beginning of September for a few days because of her refusal to do this. And so the Venus retrograde for her encapsulated the time in which she like took this stand um, against gay rights, basically. So the way that I think this makes sense for the third house, and this gets a little sort of abstract, I think, but the third house was originally known as the house of the goddess. Um, in Hellenistic astrology, it's a house which does have these connections to religion or spirituality, especially in terms of its opposition to the ninth. And the main reason that she kept giving for why she wasn't yielding on this was her religious faith. And interestingly, she said that she'd had kind of her Christian awakening in middle of 2011, which was heading again into the Blue 5 period. You see how we continue, like certain things that happen in certain years, like the Venus retrogrades, they often refer back to things that happened not just at the previous Venus retrograde 8 years prior, but the previous Sun Venus alignment just 4 years prior. That 4-year interval ends up being kind of important. And so and apparently she was inspired to become a Christian by her dying mother-in-law. So this encompasses the third house and the IC in the third house. So so essentially a relative is what gets her to become like a Christian person in 2011. And then she has this sort of major test, I guess, of her responsibilities and her faith when
she got to show God what she's really made of.
Yeah. And it's funny because she speaks of it in those terms. She says the good outweighed the bad. In her own world, the fact that she came off like a bigot, didn't seem to matter. She felt like she was
she had plenty of support. She had plenty of support.
And that's where the third house community thing comes in. Like there was this what was it? There was this thing called the Family Foundation. They did this big protest rally in Frankfort in Kentucky in August, and she spoke at that, and there were like thousands of people there, and she was kind of getting this like weird support. She also said she received ungodly things in the mail, which I love because that's third house.
Probably dildos.
Again, probably dildos.
Yeah. This is the probably Venus retrograde. Oh, dude. Right, thanks.
Sorry, I've been talking a lot. Go ahead.
This Venus retrograde. This is the one that also would trine Uranus and Aries. I mean, the every 8 years when Venus goes retrograde, Uranus will be in a different sign. But this is the one that's trine Uranus in the 11th house, which also sort of speaks to, congregations and things of that nature. If you belong to a church, that you tend to see like the people in the church are the 11th house. Your clan, your community, all that stuff. So there is a relationship between the two as well in that sense of the word. I am the fact that her natal Venus is in the 6th. So I mean, this had to do with her daily routine as a clerk, right? As a county clerk,
right? With the job,
yeah.
She tried to stop her deputies from issuing the marriage license as well, but they issued them. They didn't.
Okay.
They didn't have. So there was kind of a sense of betrayal there, I think, from from them and from her perspective. Another really interesting thing about Venus in her chart is the fact that it rules the 12th. So the 12th is like that which is inimical to you, or those people who are like against you or your enemies. And
Hmm.
so, the people that she turned down for marriage licenses, I mean, they turned right around and sued her,
Yeah.
at that time. And so, like, her enemies are ruled by Venus in general. So the people who she ends up kind of being up against, her antagonism with, is somehow represented by Venus. And in this case, it's couples who are trying to get married.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. If you're receiving ungodly things in the mail, those are coming to
right. Yeah.
they are coming to you, that they're arriving in the third house, but they're coming from the 12th.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, typically a dildo is, welcome in most contexts. But
No, yeah,
there are some where obviously it's what you don't want, or from her perspective,
yep,
ungodly.
yeah.
um so I realized, like, okay, yeah, Patrick, it didn't involve siblings. It didn't, at least as far as I
Yeah,
know. There seems to be some sort of tangential connection to this idea of relatives by her mother-in-law and the IC being there. But I think um the biggest way that it seems to make sense by the third house is the fact that the third partakes in those sort of um more contrarian and in some ways heretical connotations of the third house and spirituality and religiosity
yeah,
versus the ninth. And in this case, she was sort of seeing her experience of her religiosity, her Christianity, was in opposition to the law of the land, was in opposition to what the government wanted. And
yeah,
so this, we can see that sort of third versus ninth house axis in some ways being sort of implicated in the way that Venus retrograde sort of turned out. So I don't know. I
yeah.
feel like it's
I'd say if the
a bit
ninth
of a
house,
stretch, maybe, but not
if
real.
the
I don't
ninth
know.
if the ninth house is godly, then the third house is ungodly.
Yeah, I just salute those heroes who mailed her the used dildos.
Now,
That's
now, now. Um,
um
you've said the word dildo too much at this point.
yeah, we're gonna get taken down. Um
Okay. So are we ready for number 4?
yeah, sure. So
Okay. So tell
unless
us.
there's anything else we want to add for people who have Gemini rising and what they might be able to expect from Venus going retrograde in the third house. So that's an important thing to point out to make sure that people are getting their money's worth, figuratively.
Wait, money? We're getting money for
Hey,
this?
we're getting money? Wow. News to me. Um,
Um, yeah, there's no money. Um, I think that the Venus retrograde in the third house, yeah, is sort of the tempest in the teacup. It's I mean, the sibling thing is obvious, and it's sometimes it'll involve that because that's a common signature for the third house. But it's neighborhood stuff. It's stuff that's happening around your house that sort of draws you out of your home. It's the neighborhood bake sale and swap
or
meet
with Venus
and
retrograde, the girl next door. Yeah. uh,
right, yeah, right, yeah, the
neighborly
showering with the
hospitality.
curtains open, or I don't know, what have you. Uh so Elsa X says return of teachers. um yeah, I tend to think of, yeah, I mean, that I guess if there are teachers who need to return, that can come into it as well.
Um, I think Venus retrograde in the third house. Um, sometimes that can literally just reflect things that are happening to your relatives or siblings.
Mm,
Um, for example, um, well, this wasn't a Venus retrograde, but like at the Sun Venus conjunction in Libra, the one that we just had in October of 2022, that happened in my third house of siblings, and that was when my brother uh, uh, he announced his engagement with his girlfriend at the time. So it sort of became this um, just this signal from my own chart that like,
Sure.
oh, something kind of important's going on with um, your sibling.
Okay.
I think one of the other examples that I ended up not kind of wanting to get into was uh, I believe what's her name, Ozzy Osbourne's daughter.
Oh yeah, Kelly Osbourne.
Yeah, so she is Gemini rising, and when Venus went retrograde in Leo, I think in 2015, her brother had another child in that time. I don't know, we have to get the
Mhm.
chart up, but it's not a very
Oh, I don't have
funny
her there.
example.
Sorry,
But
I
oh,
forgot.
okay.
I meant
So
to put her up. I have her.
so Venus went retrograde in Leo in her third house, and that was when um she became an aunt. Basically, it sort of was a uh, something like that. So I would think that's another way you can kind of link, Venus retrogrades in your third house, is that it just literally shows like a a changing social dynamic in your local sphere and or with family members, with relatives or siblings.
Right. Right. Okay.
So
Moving right along.
moving on.
A moment
So
here.
what do you make of the fourth house? What do you make of Venus retrogrades in the fourth? What can you say about as a universal sort of statement on Venus retrogrades in the fourth?
It's the fourth house is very intimate. I mean, it is the home, but it also just has to do with the part of yourself that only the people who know you really well know about you. Not so much secret, but just sort of like it's the part of you that's not out in the open. It's sort of private. Um, and yeah, it's ultimately it's the home. It's the nest and the comfort and sort of being away from the public glare, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So speaking of comfort and the nest, I think that this next example it sort of involves more of the 12th house associations here because
Yeah,
for Gigi Hadid, she's a
she has
model.
natal Venus in the 12th.
Natal Venus in the 12th, and then the ruler of the 12th house is in the fourth. So we know that the topic of enemies would be somehow involved with the topic of home, and in a kind of challenging way because of Mars, especially in a diurnal chart. It sort of shows like dangers in the home, stranger dangers in the home, with
Mm.
that sort of combination. And so, what's really eerie is that when Venus went retrograde through her fourth house, there was this guy, this stalker, Marcel Porter, who was posting all these threatening messages. Oh, we can see your screen, Nick.
Yeah, I know. I'm just looking for the date, June 29th,
Oh, yeah,
2015.
it's
Because
June. Yeah,
otherwise I have to
sorry,
go
yeah.
find the date.
Oh, okay,
Uh,
I'll give you the dates.
yeah, June
Yeah,
29th,
so he was
2015.
arrested June 29th, 2015, and he'd been making kind of weird posts about her online up but before this point, but basically as Venus was gearing up to go retrograde through her fourth house, this strange guy broke into a house, and then just like a week later, she tried to sell the house. She needed to sell, she had to get out of there because this guy was just
Yeah.
causing her to feel unsafe in her own place, which I think everyone deserves to, feel safe and secure in their own home, So it's kind of
Right.
a really scary thing to have. And, granted, a lot of celebrities, especially if they happen to be very, beautiful women, they're going to have creepy men,
Sure.
coming after them to some degree. I'm not saying it's all right. I'm just saying it's probably more common. But though in this case, he actually seems to have gotten in there. Like
Yeah.
that's really well reflected by the fact that she has the planet governing enemies
Yeah.
in the fourth, and then Venus in the 12th can also reflect the idea of like one's enemies being like obsessed or
Yeah.
desiring of them,
Yeah, a stalker is definitely Venus in the 12th.
admirers. You mentioned during the podcast on Venus retrograde that Jodie Foster's whole
Yes.
story of having a stalker, that was Venus retrograde in her 12th.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there seems to be sort of a theme there, and so yeah, the Venus retrograde, gearing up to go retrograde in her 4th house, was about the reorganization of her living situation due to this very negative type of event.
And once again, the trine to Uranus in her 12th, this is also, I think this adds to the sort of craziness of it, if for want of a better word. Yeah, definitely the trine of 2015 just gave this whole other spin to Venus retrograde, where it was sort of extra outrageous, if you will.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think the aspects that are going on to the natal Venus are also of interest there. So I think the fact that the benefics are roughly conjunct her Mars, probably shows that, despite this stressful situation, she was ultimately safe, and was able to find a place or to get out of that. We can also see this also happened at a Sun Mars conjunction, which would have been roughly square her Venus as well. So we kind of see all the different sort of dimensions of this development.
Yeah. She has the natal Venus Uranus sextile. So that again, just to come back to the trine for a second, it sort of it takes that same pair of planets and puts them in a double whammy kind of thing, because her natal Venus is already susceptible to that Uranus in the 10th, and the transit happens.
So I would assume then that if someone has Venus going retrograde in the 4th house, that it could be coincident with a time when you are revisiting or rethinking your living situation. And if you have a malefic in the 4th house, it's probably because of something bad.
Yeah, something to do with the feeling comfortable, feeling safe, feeling secure.
Right. Whereas if you have like a benefic in the 4th, then maybe it's just because there's just a great opportunity that you have that ends up I think of how I have Venus in the 4th, and Venus when retrograde in my 4th house, when I made the decision that I was going to start working from home instead of continuing to go to my job. And so that kind of that was a huge relief for me at the time, because I had like a 45-minute commute. And
we've been leading out the thing to the moon too. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh yeah,
like the really obvious thing is the opposition to the moon.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine. No, I was just giving another example of how Venus retrograde, can in the 4th house can be sort of more positive.
Look, this as always, the anecdote is very specific to the horoscope we're looking at.
Right.
Loads of people in this world are Taurus rising, but they don't all have Mars in the 4th, and they're not all Gigi Hadid with her.
Some people in the comments have. Oh, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say some people in the comments have some interesting anecdotes about Venus going retrograde in the 4th house.
Oh, you want to
Someone
read them?
said, "Yes, I see myself in the Sparrow." Said, "About to have Venus RX in the 4th. The shadow period has already spoken to what it's about. I've been crunching to finish my degree, and the home has needed attention. Also, some drama with my grandfather." And then Sarah P said, "I have Venus in the 12th and Taurus rising. Last 3 retrogrades in Leo. I have moved to different U.S. states."
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so that's pretty straightforward. So
yeah,
that's the 4th house. Do you have any other?
No, I think we've covered it pretty well. Shall we move on to the 5th house?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. I'll set this.
So the 5th house is the house of pleasure, recreation, sexuality. Often involves
children
youth or children, the next generation, younger people.
And we have Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
So he has the moon in Leo. So when Venus goes retrograde in Leo, we would think this would sort of elevate or bring to attention these topics of the fifth house. In August of 2015, which was during the Venus retrograde in Leo, that was when his first child was born.
Of the date?
We don't have the exact date because he didn't
okay.
even give he didn't even give the name out. He's very private about it, but
Okay.
but we know that it was August of 2015, and in that entire time,
Sure. Yeah.
Venus was retrograde in the fifth house. Now, I'm not saying this can happen for everyone. Obviously, people, depending on your age or your relationship status, isn't necessarily going to happen for you. But I think that it's just such a straightforward example of a major fifth house transit like this. That it just hardly needs more explanation. It's just kind of like that. Now, when we talked last time or some previous time, I'd mentioned that some of the things I might expect from Venus going retrograde in the fifth house would be like novel experiences with sexuality.
Right.
So this was quite a hard one to research because, these aren't exactly details that you can find easily. There's people's sort of private lives, whereas the times that people might like have children, for example, that tends to be a little more of a public record.
Yeah.
So I think that's worth considering. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
No,
that?
His chart is kind of straightforward in that way, that the moon is opposite his natal Venus. So the Venus retrograde was also his opposite his natal Venus. It's all kind of plugged in there. The nodes are on his ascendant descendant axis, and that's pretty common in family connections.
Now, one thing is kind of interesting isn't the average length of a human gestation
9 months
equivalent to the distance between a Sun Venus alignment with another Sun Venus alignment?
Yeah.
Which means if the child was born during the retrograde in the fifth, that means the conception would have happened at the previous Sun Venus exterior conjunction, which would have been where?
November of 2014.
What sign would that be? Scorpio?
Yeah.
Although it would have been like it would have been coming closer while it was still in Libra, and then it would have actually conjoined in Scorpio, right?
Yeah.
So I imagine that, since the Sun and Venus were still so close to each other in the seventh house, that would make sense then for that alignment having a close connection to the topics of partnership, which obviously takes two to tango.
Yeah. They haven't managed to narrow that thing down to one.
Yeah, I think I think he got married the previous year. I think he got married in 2014. I don't know exactly when, but this is pretty appropriate. So Sun Venus conjunction in the seventh house, roughly occurring within the time frame of conception. Venus retrograde in the fifth house at the time the child's born. Fifth house of children. So these things sometimes are just as straightforward as that.
Fair enough. And you can totally get how he won't talk about his kid's birth date. He's the ruler of his ascendant is in the 12th.
In the 12th. He's very, very, he's extremely, protective of his privacy. And, I get it,
Yep.
Makes sense.
All
Otherwise,
right.
you have astrologers discussing you on live streams, the very thing he's trying to like.
So creepy. Oh, it's so creepy.
I know. Now, one other example I would want to mention about Venus retrograde is kind of more of a Saturn example, but Bryce Dallas Howard, who she's an actress. You've probably seen her in
Ron Howard's daughter.
Ron Howard's daughter, yeah. She's a force though in her own right. She's a good director. She's been in some really huge films. She's been in the Jurassic World movies. If you've seen those recently, she was in an episode of Black Mirror that I really liked. Um,
There
she's
she is. I'm
directed a
going to
few
put
of
her up.
the Mandalorian episodes and Boba Fett episodes that have been really, really good. So yeah,
There she is.
she has Aries rising, and so she had a Venus retrograde occur in her fifth house in 2007, and that occurred in proximity to Saturn in her fifth house. Now, she had her first child, I believe it was like the end of 2006 or the beginning of 2007, I forget. But that was while Saturn was going through her fifth house in that time frame, and she suffered terrible postpartum depression that she's
Okay.
spoken about as Saturn was going through her fifth house, and she said it lasted for about 18 months. But in any case, I just thought it was interesting that, you know, while Saturn is probably the better explanation of why she might have had this experience, you know, astrologically, you know, Saturn in the fifth house dealing with postpartum depression, the fact that there was also a Venus retrograde in the fifth house
Yeah.
at some point during that postpartum depression, I would wonder if there was something about that time that might have, I don't know, signaled sort of the eventual resolution of
Yeah.
that problem or something like that. So I didn't. It's kind of a bad example in some ways because I don't know exactly what occurred in that time. Obviously, these are very personal things, but I still think it's a good example, at least, well, I guess, of Saturn going through the fifth house. That it's about bringing those sort of Saturnian significations of well, it can be depressive, you know, and oppressive, but in relation to children. So it definitely makes sense that it's you know, that's what it was centered around, was
Yep.
children.
Cool. All right.
Is there anything you would want to say about Venus retrograde in the fifth house? Or do you have any other examples off the top of your head that you think could be useful to anyone?
No.
Okay.
I was going to move us into the sixth.
All right.
Whoops. Hold on a second here. There we are. Yeah, the sixth house here.
Take it away.
All right. This is, as you know, I love studying charts of people that I don't necessarily like. Yeah, Geraldo Rivera. I first got interested in studying his chart because, for those of you who are too young to remember, back in the 80s, Geraldo had this TV show. Well, he was trying to make it big, kind of. He'd always been this like daytime TV guy. But he was going to have this big special. They were demolishing this building in Chicago that had a safe that had once belonged to, oh God, who's the gangster?
Al Capone.
Al Capone. Al Capone's, you know, safe, you know, this big safe that had belonged to Al Capone. And Geraldo was going to open it on live TV. Well, he did open it on live TV. And like there was all this, like it was a big campaign, like they advertised, you know, tune in to watch Geraldo open Al Capone safe, and it was this big thing. This wasn't a Venus retrograde event, but it's just like, this is how he became famous and how I wound up wanting to study him. They opened the vault on live TV, and there was nothing in it. And he went home thinking he was like this big loser and he'd ruined his career. And then he woke up the next morning to find out that the show had like the biggest ratings ever in TV history. And, you know, his future was secured. Anyway, that's that event. But what the thing I like about him, the thing that's Venus retrograde about him, in September of 1991, whoops, I want to do a bi-wheel. September 1st, 1991, he published his memoir. This is, whoops, that's not 1991. There we are. Venus. So he's a red 5. He's born just before Venus went retrograde, like a month before or so. But Venus went retrograde close to his natal Venus, and he published his memoir called Exposing Myself. And in this book, actually, it's not so funny. It's just kind of funny how it came back at him. In his book, he bragged about sleeping with a lot of actresses who, like, later, like when people went and asked the actresses about him, they were like, no, I never slept with that guy. But then it got even worse. One of the women he said he slept with in that book was Bette Midler. And there's a clip, you can even see it online, like the whole Barbara Walters episode. Barbara Walters interviewed Bette Midler just coincidentally within a few weeks of the book coming out. And Barbara Walters said, well, you know, Geraldo in his book is talking about how the two of you had this thing. And she's like, I don't remember that happening, but I'll tell you this. And she goes on to relate a story of how she did do like this. She taped some kind of interview with Geraldo back in the 70s. And she says that Geraldo and his producer sort of like drugged her with poppers, like they, you know, under her nose kind of thing, and groped her. And this came out in the interview. Nothing was made of it except until like years later, you know, in 2017, this interview surfaced, and, you know, right in the middle of the whole Me Too thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Geraldo was already trying to defend Matt Lauer, and then like this, you know, Bette Midler thing from 1991 came up, and so he published the book, and the interview happened during the Venus retrograde on his Venus. And even though it was much, much later that it came back to grab him, and that period in November of 2017 wasn't a Venus retrograde, but just, you know, like all the, this was like a time bomb waiting to go off and explode things for him. Now, it's in his sixth house, but Venus rules the third and the eighth.
Mm.
So there is still this sort of like a similar to some of the other examples where it's a bit convoluted and has more to do with the houses that Venus rules. You know, the third house of publishing and gossip and all that kind of thing. So yeah.
Bette Midler has Aries rising, so that Venus retrograde would have happened in the fifth house if she's like relating the story of kind of a messed up, you know, thing that was fifth house in nature, but kind of messed up.
Yeah. There you go.
Huh. Wow.
Yeah.
That's that's really funny in some ways, though. That he claimed to have slept with him when he denied it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's
so that's the theme. He reports on things that just aren't there or aren't real, you know.
That's just it. Like, and
there's a lot of hoopla, but nothing actually there,
except for one time when in 2003, when he was, you know, on Fox by then, the Iraq war had just broken out, and he was like reporting from the scene. And he did this thing, like he was drawing, you know, in the sand for the camera, explaining like where the American troops were relative to this position and that. And he was literally like giving away like important like military positions on the news.
So he's either reporting things he shouldn't be, or just reporting nothing burgers.
Exactly.
Wow. That's really interesting. I might have to look closer at his chart.
Oh, his chart is fun. It keeps on giving. I mean, yeah.
Now, for other people who have the sixth where Venus is going retrograde, some other scenarios that I could probably envision for how to make sense of that statement would be like, or how to make sense of that configuration would be, say, if you're in a position where you are employing others, because the sixth house is to do with people in service to you. I would think that would be like changeovers in personnel, probably because of like personal drama or something like that. It would be like social dramas involving the people who are in service to you. And I think this could, I mean, I don't want to put out such specific scenarios, but I wouldn't be surprised. I would link it with Venus retrograde in the sixth house if someone was talking about like a, you know, an HR investigation at work, you know, because of like inappropriate comments or, you know, at worst, you know, sexual harassment, that kind of thing. It would sort of have to do with those people in your
the
life,
$20 bill on your dresser disappeared, and the maid suddenly has a nice new something.
yeah, like your social transgressions involving
Yeah.
sort of people in positions beneath you or lower in relative hierarchy.
It can also
Um,
be for some people, for whom a daily routine is a really deeply entrenched thing. It's some kind of intrusion on the daily routine, you know. Um,
right.
I mean, the different people have different lifestyles, but if you're someone that really has a sort of a rigid, like where the routine of the day is some sort of core comfort or focus for an individual, then that Venus retrograde will be some kind of disruption.
Hmm. Since the sixth house can also relate to like physical struggles or like illness or injury, then I might even wonder like about Venusian types of problems, like perhaps um, allergies to certain foods cropping up, like if, uh, health issues that come about from what you like eat, or on a completely different kind of Venusian level, I might even think of like I don't want to all Pisces risings. I'm sorry. I would almost wonder if this would be like
You're
greater
talking about
incidences of like
STDs?
STDs, yeah, STIs, venereal disease, because that's kind of Venusy, but like in a kind of weird way in the sixth house. So I would think
Put a
it
cap on it, folks. Put a happy cap on.
yeah, and that works. I think that's good advice for any rising sign out there. But I would think for Pisces rising, Venus retrograde in Leo, there would be maybe that sort of heightened kind of possibility of there
Mm.
being health issues from things that come about that you wouldn't necessarily think of as bad, right? Because it's Venus. It should be okay for me to eat this type of thing. It should be for me to have this type of dye, or it should be, okay to get down and dirty, right? But it just doesn't work out.
Well, I
Maybe
mean,
because of
speaking
the
of which, on,
retrograde.
on the other hand, it can also be sort of like a time of transformation of the daily routine in,
Sure, that's the more
to
neutral.
like sort of to a
Yeah,
healthier
yeah.
or unhealthier, going from one to the other. So if you're
Sure.
thinking about that diet, if you're thinking about that, like that's something I'm doing this summer. I'm hiking up the mountains of Vancouver almost every day, and I'm determined to look different than I'm start at the end of
Although
the
that's
summer
more of
than
a
how I
first
started the
house
summer.
thing because it's about looking different. Same thing with me
Sure.
and working out. It's kind of a first house thing.
Yeah, yeah, it tends to. The last
Um,
time Venus was retrograde in my first house, I succeeded in losing a lot of weight, but then I met my wife to be, and we drank a lot of gin, and all there it went.
um,
So you go.
all right.
All right.
So
So on to the
seventh
seventh
house.
house. Okay.
So you know, there were a lot of there are so many examples of Venus just having to do with romance in general. Even without necessarily having to happen in the seventh, that it was actually kind of hard just finding like one extremely good example of an Aquarius rising experiencing Venus going retrograde in the seventh. One though that did sort of stand out to me was Michelle Williams. She had a break. She broke up with Heath Ledger, the actor. This was late August or early September of 2007 that this happened, and of course, he died just a few months later due to his struggles with substance abuse, and that sort of speculated that that was part of the reason why the relationship ended. Of course, that was also while Saturn was going through the seventh house. There also would have been eclipses in the seventh house. I think the previous solar eclipse would have
Mhm.
happened in the seventh house. So you have a lot of really kind of more negative transits happening at that particular time. So yeah, Venus going retrograde, Saturn passing through the seventh, eclipses in the seventh, sort of all building towards a relationship that couldn't continue. Obviously, it's very sad.
The eclipse is on her nodes, no less.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, these transits were experienced by everyone who had Aquarius rising to some degree, but I think the things that probably differentiate it for her, probably I think about how the ruler of the 7th house in her natal chart is in the 8th, which would connect the topic of partnerships with the topics of death. So it's really sad. But yeah, she was with someone who passed away prematurely, and um, yeah, so
Yeah, she's got that sort of to become a widow at what, 27?
yeah, it's pretty.
Yeah.
I don't know. I forget if they were married. I think they might not have been actually married, but like that
Well,
was.
I thought they were.
Oh,
I could be
in any
wrong, but
case, they were
they
together,
I mean, they were definitely in a pair. Yeah.
right?
And I remember
Um,
when he died. I mean, she was like, I
right.
remember
Yeah,
seeing
it
the
was
the
not.
clips of her there in Brooklyn, and
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it was a bad time.
yeah.
Um, so I'm not saying that if you're Aquarius rising, your partner's going to die.
No.
But I am saying that if you're
He he
Aquarius
he
rising,
did.
Venus
Sorry,
goes retrograde.
he did film The Dark Knight during this summer as well, didn't he? Summer of 2000s, or is it a little bit
Probably
earlier?
because it was
I
released
think,
in
yeah.
2008.
I'm
So
pretty sure it was filmed during this Red 5 retrograde. It must have been just as he was like, she broke up with the Joker, you know.
I guess, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's just kind of
Yeah.
sad all around. But if you are a Leo, right? Sorry, if you are an Aquarius rising and Venus is going retrograde through your 7th house, I think it could be relevant for the beginning of a new partnership, but it could also be, a time of endings as well. It's hard to tell exactly which end it's going to be,
Or
whether
it's
it's
your
going to be a beginning or ending,
or
but
your partner is going through
through
sort of,
something.
yeah, your partner is going through retrograde type ordeals, their own sort of scandals, or their own sort of uh yeah, interactions with the consensus, if you will. Things are being stirred up around them, or they're actively stirring things up.
Yeah, I think that's important to remember too, is that sometimes transits that happen in the 7th house aren't just your own connection with the relationships, but about things that happen to the person that you're with.
Yeah.
And so having eclipses there, having Saturn there, having Venus retrograde there, we just know that would have been would have reflected the other person in your life kind of going through it, through a period, a more depressive period because of Saturn, and through just through going through, I guess, just changes, with
Yeah,
eclipses and Venus retrograde in there, and
for
changes
sure.
in their attachment. So sometimes I've seen, in this same, I've seen this same retrograde occur for other Aquarius risings where they their partner like cheated on them during that time. For another person I know who had Aquarius rising, when Venus went retrograde in Leo, it was when their partner really changed in the aftermath of them having an abortion. It really changed the dynamic of their relationship, and it never really quite recovered, and eventually led to them breaking up. And it was kind of bad. So, but that was kind of like that retrograde was sort of the middle of that
Yeah.
sort of course of events. So we just know that Venus retrogrades in the 7th house, can be pretty tricky to navigate if you're in, a relationship. I think at the very least you could say it's a kind of stress test in some ways for relationships generally.
Hmm.
Is there anything else you'd want to add?
No, like, beautifully said. Beautifully
Okay,
said. Yeah, yeah. Shall we move on to the eighth house?
sure.
I think we have a
Yeah.
pair. We both have an eighth house to offer. Shall we go with?
Okay. Yeah.
Uh,
Sure.
we'll go with yours first.
So the 8th house is the house of mortality and um, deathliness. I mean, I don't want to say that's all it's about, but I would say that typically, if you have, um, whatever planets are in the 8th house are going to be, uh, they're kind of stressed out to be there. I don't think planets really like being in the 8th house because they're in that sign which is about to set, but it hasn't quite set yet. It's sort of like being next on the plank. and knowing that you're next
Yeah,
to
yeah.
jump off into
Yeah,
the
like it's the French Revolution, and they're, you're 20th in line at the guillotine, and you see the other
yeah
19 go before you.
the eighth house. So that's why I feel like planets in the eighth house are kind of waiting
Yeah.
for the guillotine in a way. And
I always say that the eighth house is about dying. The seventh house is death, but the eighth house is about dying and the anxiety and all that stuff.
right, yeah, that's it. So I guess that's a good way to put it. Is planets in the eighth are anxious, and so even the good things that you can get from like benefics growing from the eighth house, there's often a way in which they're kind of compromised, because the way that they bring about good only comes about through something else that's gone wrong. For example, if you think about the eighth house in terms of inheritance, that's when you get something
Because
because
someone has died.
because someone died, or the eighth house is pools of money, right? So it makes sense for things like insurance. Well, you only get to claim your benefits on insurance when
Something
something
goes
goes
wrong.
wrong, right? I mean, or if you get to if you get a settlement as part of a legal dispute, it's because something bad happened. It's so it often it kind of taints the goods that come with that place. It's sort of like compromised goods, and in the context of Venus retrograde, I feel like it's love but in the wrong places. And so the chart we have up here is Lamar Odom. He's a basketball player. He was married to Khloe Kardashian. Now, I have never watched in my entire life one episode of
A
Keeping Up
Kardashian
with the
show?
Kardashians or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I'm
Nor have I
really
ever watched the LA Lakers.
I'm
So
working with so I'm working with kind of secondhand information. I'm not like the best person to probably tell this story, and I apologize if I'm like leaving any crucial thing in. And I don't want to and I don't want to reduce
all the Kardashian scholars are like, ready to.
I don't want to reduce Lamar Odom down to this one moment, this lowest moment of his life, probably, almost certainly. He has
What's
had
the
many
date
other
we're
things
looking
he's
for again?
done. We're looking at October. We're looking at October 13th, 2015. So the story is, he signed divorce papers from Khloe Kardashian on July 21st, 2015. So that was just
Sorry,
as Venus was
July
about to station
21st.
retrograde. July 21st, 2015 was when he signed the divorce papers with Khloe Kardashian. So we can see that he has Sun, Mercury, and Mars in the seventh house, and Venus is just about to station retrograde in the ninth and go back into the eighth. He was not in a good mental state about all of this. He appeared in the news on August 12th, 2015. He ambushed Khloe Kardashian when she was coming out of a gym or something over her new relationship with this other guy, James Harden. And so he was obviously really distraught about the fact that she was kind of moving on with her life. And this is again as Venus is moving retrograde back into his eighth. But where it gets kind of eighth house-ish, and luckily it wasn't the worst case scenario, but on October 13th, 2015, he was discovered unconscious at a brothel. He had suffered a massive overdose of drugs and almost died. He was in a coma through that time period, and came as close to death as anyone could, right? I mean, he had suffered multiple heart attacks, suffered multiple strokes, and the doctors said he was basically a walking miracle that he was able to survive. And interestingly, Khloe Kardashian actually postponed the divorce. They basically called off the divorce, and she cared for him as he was rehabilitating. Eventually they did still get separated, but I think it's pretty crazy that Venus is retrograde through the eighth house basically coincided with this time when he was really losing it over the end, facing the prospect of the end of the relationship and turning to pleasure, but in a bad way, looking for connection and something that make him feel good, but in a way that was destructive to him,
There
right?
is an interesting picture here, because by the time he has natal Venus in the 12th here with Mercury and Neptune, by the time of the overdose, I mean, Venus is out of his 8th, of course,
That's right.
but Saturn is on his natal Venus in the
Right.
12th. And
And this has been
you can
happening
see,
while, yeah,
but you can see how, so like the overdose itself is like sort of like we're still in the red 5, but the overdose itself really had more to do, I think, with him confronting her. Uh, um, you know,
the overdose. Oh, you mean the Venus retrograde?
the Venus retrograde had more to do with him
Yeah,
confronting her at the gym on August 12th. Um, while Saturn was still in Scorpio, it wasn't on his Venus, and then the overdose is more sort of Saturn going on to his Venus as a consequence. But you can see here the Venus retrograde on his Mars in the 8th, which I think is more about like the jealousy and the, like, who the hell is this guy and all that stuff that comes out of a conversation like that.
sure. Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, I don't presume to know all the details that led up to the final night, of him being at this brothel, but um I guess he's sort of struggled with drugs before, and so I just imagine that he probably resorted to drugs as a way of coping with what he was feeling leading up to that point. And so I still think it makes sense that Venus was going retrograde through his 8th house when he like was resorting to
Yeah.
finding sources of comfort that were in some sense disordered, that kind
Mm.
of didn't help him, maybe only in the moment, but came at such a high cost that it almost killed him.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, and again, it's natal Venus in the 12th, so it's not like Venus retrograde in the 8th house is going to bring everyone to the brink of death. But
Right.
once again, it's another example of this being specific to the horoscope in
Right.
question, to the
Well,
light
and
in
also
question.
keep in mind, yeah, the other reason why this was so negative for him as well is because we can see that his contrary to sect malefic is Mars, which is present in the 8th house. So he's had a lot of personal tragedies in his life. He's had friends pass away from like really bad
Mm.
deaths. One friend he lost was from he lost a friend from a like a flesh-eating bacteria.
Oh,
He
good
lost a
grief!
friend who was murdered. Well, and look at what Mars rules in his chart. Mars rules the 11th house of friendship, and it's
Yeah,
placed in the 8th. So it
yeah,
shows someone whose friends he loses friends through like through terrible means. It's doesn't always reflect something about himself, but I think it's the fact that
yeah,
uh, you know all of those different factors sort of combine to kind of paint this picture of what happened.
yeah, yeah.
Now I don't know about like the financial situation surrounding all of this. I don't know what the
Look, he played for the Lakers. He can't be
right.
hurting. it's
Oh
it's
no,
not.
oh no, I meant well in terms of like the divorce, because oftentimes division of
Okay,
assets becomes
yeah.
an issue during
I mean,
divorce
sure, he's married
negotiations.
to a Kardashian, so even for an LA Laker, like, that gets kind of
Yeah, so in
yeah,
any case,
no one's
yeah,
out on the street. No one's out on
yeah,
the
yeah,
street. I
right,
mean,
right, right.
they both came into this like they were both millionaires,
Pretty,
so
yeah,
you know.
right. Yeah, it's just in terms of the house as well as kind of hinting at. So that was my Venus retrograde in the 8th house type example.
All right, very good, a very very good one. I've got one too. It's not necessarily one that people can personally relate to, but I'll just sort of show it for the astrology properties. Because this is someone who's in the news a lot these days. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France. He was elected in 2017, but what happened was in early 2015, he sort of gained national recognition. He was a minister in the government, and he gained recognition through like TV and stuff that his department was going on. There was a law passed that he had sort of put through the French National Assembly and all this stuff. So
Like a business reform type
yeah,
thing.
exactly. And he was becoming this, sort of this big national figure. And then in the summer of 2015, I don't know the exact date, but in the summer of 2015, he announced he was no longer a socialist and he was going to form a new party, which he did the following year. But he's got Mars retrograde in the 8th, not unlike, but well,
Actually,
Lamar
quite
Odom,
similar to Lamar. Yeah.
yeah, Lamar Odom also has Venus in the 12th and the Mars in the 8th. So it is similar there. But in this case, he broke from the party. He was he wasn't getting along with Francois Hollande, who was the president at the time, and other people in the government. And so he broke. He said he was no longer a socialist. So it wasn't just breaking from the party. It was like sort of breaking with his ideology, if you will. Now, there is a very sort of complex picture here. The fact that Jupiter is on his Saturn in the 9th, which probably has more to do with like the actual shift in ideology, and the Saturn on the midheaven having to do with the sort of the break in public life with because it's an 11th house midheaven break with his party, with his compatriots, if you will. But on top of it all, it's this Venus retrograde that was happening when he did it. The Red 5 is really big in French history. France has had more Red 5 presidents and prime ministers, well, especially more Red 5 presidents than any of the other intervals by far. Somewhere I have a grid of all that, but I'll show it in another live stream sometime. And of course, right now, the main reason I bring this up is right now, France is like exploding in revolution. And here he is sort of coming back to, remember, he gave up socialism 8 years ago. And sort of the idea of a state that sort of looks after its people and what have you, moving somewhat to the right, if you will.
It moved totally to the right.
Yeah. From being a socialist,
Yeah.
So yeah, like compared to sort of the trouble he's in now, which could, very easily signify the end of his presidency soon. Although the election is still a little bit away, I think. That's it. Sort of the breaking with his past, the sort of initiating a new course for him. Being caught up in a lot of controversy.
Right. Well, I mean, situation. That Mars retrograde in the 8th house square Uranus in Scorpio, that's it's so interesting to think about the fact that the main things that this guy's had to deal with as prime minister that have been really explosive. I mean, first was like the yellow vest protests, which came about because of comments he'd made about taxes on gas, I believe. And so like the issue of like taxation ends up being kind of the lightning rod to this, really significant wave of opposition. And that, I think, at least from American standards, even that was pretty extraordinary, the yellow vest movement. But this is like on a whole other level. And of course, it's from, again, threatening to sort of add to people's tax burden or to cut down on the benefits that people receive from shared resources, right? So like Mars in the 8th house, retrograde no less, it seems to really be this just uncontrollable kind of lightning rod.
And of course, I mean, the other thing is, this ride is coming about because of the murder of a kid, and people's reaction to it and everything. I mean, that's what really sort of got things going this time.
Right.
So yeah, very, very hot summer for Mr. Macron, no doubt.
Right. As far as how it relates to Venus retrograde, it's so interesting because there have been other Venus retrogrades which have meant a fair amount to him in a way that is quite different. So, for example, one of the more interesting Venus retrograde stories involving Emmanuel Macron, of course, is the fact that he met his current wife when he was 15 years old, and she was his teacher. His wife, she was born during a red one. She was born with Sun and Venus in Aries while Venus is retrograde. And I believe they met while Venus was retrograde in Aries, because I did the math. And then they ended up finally getting married much later on once he was an adult. They got married, I believe, in September of 2007. So right in the aftermath
Okay,
of,
there you
still in
go.
the red 5,
Still in the red
but
5. Yeah.
still in the red 5, but in the aftermath, of the Venus retrograde in Leo. So there's some stuff going on there with Venus retrograde that's not necessarily immediately apparent, and I would assume that to be the case too with Venus in the 8th, since the 8th house tends to be a more private or secretive house. I would think that
Well, so his
some of the,
natal Venus is in the 12th.
his
I'm
natal
sure,
Venus is in the 12th, and
and
then
I'm sure when,
transiting Venus will be
yeah,
in is in the
yeah.
8th. So I don't know what kind of freaky stuff Macron likes to get up to, but I would wonder about
Well,
the
certainly,
the
having
8th.
Venus in the 12th, if you're 15 years old and dating your teacher, you definitely have to keep your
Yeah.
mouth shut about it.
Yeah, I don't know about the detail. I don't know that they. I mean,
Well, they met them. Yeah,
I don't
I know.
know. I don't know exactly what happened. I just know that that's when they first sort of
Yeah,
connected.
sure.
Um,
Sure.
just because otherwise I might be prone to making an incorrect statement. I probably
Fair enough.
got a few things wrong so far. It's a lot of details.
No, I think we're doing okay. Shall we
Yeah,
move on to the 9th?
sure. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the 9th. And I have our next.
So the 9th house is the house. I like to think of it as the house of broadening one's horizons, whether that's physically or mentally or intellectually.
Consulting an oracle. That was the Hellenistic phrase, right?
Oh,
The
really? Yeah,
9th house
it's
is consulting an oracle. I like that. I mean, yeah, the sort of speaking to God, if you will.
right. It's the house of God, according to the Hellenistic astrologers. And so the 9th house, I think, in sort of a modern context, relates to travel, sometimes very literally, but I think it's not just travel of the body, but travel of the mind as well. It's the way we explore, or the way we try to get a better vantage point to sort of see further, and to have a bigger, sort of broader perspective on the world. And some people do this through their exploration of religion, or higher
Nature.
education, or astrology, even, as a way that people try to sort of gain insight into the sort of the bigger, broader picture. So having a Venus retrograde in the 9th house should, in theory, on some level, bring about ultimately somewhat more positive engagements with this topic of like discovering what you think is right, or making new breakthroughs in your own sort of personal relationship with divinity, or whatever that is. And so I thought kind of an interesting example of this is Sarah Silverman, because well, very recently I noticed that literally just like a week ago, she joined this lawsuit with a couple of authors against OpenAI and Meta for copyright infringement.
Do you have a date for me?
July 10th. That was literally just like 6 days ago. So she is undertaking this action right as Venus is stationing retrograde in the 9th house. And the 9th house also corresponds to legal disputes and legal matters. So I think it's also kind of interesting that Mars is reaching this opposition with Saturn as well across the 10th and 4th. But the reason why this made me think, oh, this is kind of a good 9th house example, is because I was thinking back, well, what did Sarah Silverman do 8 years earlier? Well, she got extremely involved in the campaign of Bernie Sanders. She kind of went through this. I mean, her comedy has always been like
Edgy.
Politically charged and edgy. Of course she's edgy. She's a red
2.
Red 2, yeah.
With Venus stationing direct in Scorpio on the 12th. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So unfortunately, she might also have stalker issues as well. But but with Venus going retrograde in the 9th, it's really interesting that, for example, she endorsed Bernie Sanders at this event on August 10th, 2015, with like 27,000 people. She was basically one of his most high-profile surrogates, to the point that she even spoke at the Democratic National Convention the year later to kind of convince Bernie people to get on board with voting for Hillary in 2016.
Right.
So she so it seems that like the Venus retrogrades in Leo, at least the ones I could sort of tell from the sort of current, what's happening currently and what happened 8 years ago, is that this is kind of like when she goes into her sort of more overtly activist phase, I guess,
Mhm.
overtly more political phase. Who knows? Maybe down the road, maybe you'll even
President
see.
Silverman.
I mean, on the one hand, that would be like really funny. Maybe just as a joke. I don't know, but
Definitely,
she
if that happens, she'll be the first president to have said the word vagina that many times publicly.
yeah. And so then I thought, well, so then I thought, well, what about 2007? Wouldn't that have been another kind of
Right.
sort of political involvement on her part? And I couldn't really tell what she was doing in the lead up to the 2008 election. I know that she eventually did make some pro Obama videos in for the 2012 election, but I couldn't really see what she was doing in 2007, 2008. But I thought was interesting about August to September of 2007 during the Venus retrograde in Leo. That time, that was when she made the only jokes I think that she's actually ever apologized for.
Okay.
There was an
Yeah.
award ceremony in like June where she made these jokes about Paris Hilton going to jail. And then she also made some pretty hard hitting jokes against Britney Spears, who at that point was, having a
Yeah.
lot of
Trouble.
struggles and troubles. And so it was kind of seen as like, stomping on someone when they're down a bit. And
Yep.
I think those might be the only jokes she's actually ever apologized for in
Yeah, and
her
and
career.
she's told many jokes that people
That,
might
yeah.
want her to apologize for, but that she would not. So, yeah.
Right. So I thought that was just kind of interesting because that kind of reminds me of how Venus retrogrades oftentimes are like when, well, in the kind of uh in the what's his name? I have his book right here. Bruce Schofield
Okay.
version of the Quetzalcoatl myth, mapping to the Venus synodic cycle. He talks about how Venus retrogrades are like times where like a sin is committed, and then there's sort of a process of like reaching sort of forgiveness. So sometimes Venus retrogrades can be times of like social transgressions, which later might be able to be healed or repaired during some subsequent phase of Venus. I think you've seen other like apologies and stuff take place with like Venus transits, right?
Yeah, I can't think of one offhand. Have I
What
spoken
about Sinead O'Connor? Did she have like a Venus
that wasn't
Saturn recurrence or
Oh,
something?
yeah, but it's not a Venus retrograde.
Yeah, I don't want to get too derailed
Oh,
by
wait.
mentioning that, but
No, it's not. Yeah, no, it's not a Venus retrograde. She has a Venus Saturn square, and it wasn't an apology, but she tore up a picture of the Pope on Saturday Night Live, and then and people didn't know why. That was the thing, because it wasn't a big story
see,
that
people
was.
understand it now.
Yeah, no,
She
a
really
lot.
was ahead of her time then.
She was very up. She was very ahead of her time. I'll just show it since you brought it up. Show it quickly.
Someone in the comments also said that she, referring to Sarah Silverman, also apologized for doing blackface on her show. Might have been
Right.
around that same time too. Wow. Okay, so that's interesting too, because I think in 2007 that was when the actor who played Kramer on Seinfeld, that was when he
That
had
was
his big fall from
that was
grace.
in the autumn of 2006, though. That wasn't
Oh, that was?
2006,
Oh, I
but
thought that
yeah.
was 2007. Okay,
I
my
remember that
bad.
being I remember it being like October, November 2006. Yeah, this is Sinead. She's got Venus square Saturn, and when there was a Venus Saturn square, this is when she tore up the Pope. And this was, so it's not Venus retrograde, but you have the same sort of like, I'm breaking
Recurrence.
from the group, I'm breaking from the community, and breaking with
Well,
specifically
breaking with decorum,
yeah, with
like
decorum, and yeah.
like taking a stand against, a um having basically placing one value over another.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's just a
Um,
sidebar.
yeah. So in any case, so I think Venus retrogrades in her ninth house seem to um coincide with these times where
Yeah.
she either like oversteps her bounds and has to sort of come back from it, or is getting sort of becoming sort of more politically engaged.
Yeah.
On the Sun Venus exterior front, back in, let me make sure I got this right. I forget if it's the Sun Venus exterior conjunction of 2011 or 2019, but right in August of one of those years where there was a Sun Venus exterior conjunction in the ninth, she received these death threats from these Baptist pastors who were reacting to a really old clip of her making some jokes about Jesus, which is interesting because, well, she had a whole thing called Jesus is Magic, right? But it reminds me of how the ninth house is, the house of religion and places of worship and orthodoxy. So, Venus retrograde in the ninth or other transits through the ninth house can be sort of times where you're interacting with that. So having like a Sun Venus alignment in the ninth house, where this sort of old thing is being sort of brought back up and has this sort of threat made against her by
Baptist.
pastors. Yeah,
Sure.
it's kind of sort of reminiscent of her tendency to swing hard.
Okay.
So
shall we go to Venus retrograde in the 10th?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. This is a good one too. So lead us into it.
Yeah, so the 10th house is the house of not just career,
Visibility,
and reputation. Yeah, the 10th house can also have this connection to identity in a more public facing way.
Yeah, I always relate it. It's the point in the sky that's visible from the greatest distance, and so it's analogous to like how people who don't really know you, how they know you. Like if you live in a village and you're the baker in the village, people know you as the baker. Like it is what you do as a job, but more importantly, it's the stamp that you get. It's how like casual acquaintances or people in your neighborhood or just people around you who don't know you very well, how they will know you. So it's
Right.
career, it's reputation, it's that sort of that
Yeah.
public identity.
I would say that's especially the case in Caitlyn Jenner's chart because the ruler of the 10th house is the sun on the ascendant, right?
Yeah.
So this is like connecting very much, the idea of what they do and how they're known with who they are, and to some degree, like their appearance and their body, because it's connecting the 10th to the first. And that's relevant both in terms of the history as an athlete, as it is today, being known for bringing trans awareness to a new height. And that all seemed to coincide with the Venus retrograde of 2015, when Venus stationed retrograde and went retrograde through Leo, which is the 10th whole sign house of Caitlyn Jenner's natal chart.
Yeah.
And so while she had already come out as trans earlier in the year,
but she came out, when was it?
It was like April or something of 2015, but it wasn't until we get close to like June and July. This is really when the more public version of this is happening. The famous Vanity Fair cover for July of 2015, that debuted on June 1st, 2015.
Okay.
And then she had a whole like mini series, like a TV show called I Am Kate.
That aired when? July of 2015?
July 26th, 2015 was when that came out. So we can see that's right as Venus is going retrograde through the 10th. And just 3 days before that, they held a renaming ceremony for themselves, for herself, to be officially renamed Caitlyn. And so that was July 23rd, 2015. So we can see these, she ends up
right
becoming,
as Venus is going retrograde on Mars. Yeah.
She is, she's really, in a huge way, just becoming this new kind of, for some people who had maybe never really, had to be sort of confronted with the reality of trans lives in any particular way. You had this really
Sure.
high profile example just staring everyone right in the face. So, like, no,
On the biggest TV show.
yeah, trans people exist, and
yeah,
here is one.
yeah.
So I think that's pretty interesting. So for everyone who has Scorpio rising, I would think that Venus retrogrades. Sorry,
speaking also of Venus square Saturn and the recurrence. This was, she has Venus square Saturn, and all this coming out was very Venus square Saturn. So once again, the whole thing about consensus, and the reality, the existence of people that maybe a large part of society isn't typically aware of or tuned into.
Right.
You can see it coming in there.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I think for anyone who's a Scorpio rising, there would be some degree to which Venus retrogrades in the 10th house would correspond with
exposure.
Yeah. Self reinvention maybe in your career, or
rebranding
yeah, that's a good idea.
I mean, that that's Caitlin, on top of everything else, was definitely rebranding herself. This whole renaming.
Well, yeah, renaming. I mean, very literal. Like that's exactly the point. And we can sort of see why it happened in a year like 2015 rather than like say earlier or before.
Yeah.
Now, one other kind of interesting thing about this Venus retrograde is we can see Venus also rules Caitlin's 7th house of partnerships, and it's weird because although it doesn't quite match up with the retrogrades, her divorce to Chris was finalized in 2015, and they got together in the beginning of 1991, which was a previous Venus retrograde in Jupiter, Venus retrograde in Virgo to Leo with Jupiter. So there seemed to be some broad Venus-Jupiter correspondence between these 2 years, 1991 and 2015, that just happened to bookend the timing of that relationship. Now, the specific timing might have some alternate, explanations, but I think that the general correspondence is sort of enough to know, like, okay, that's probably some sort of, Venus Jupiter thing.
Yeah.
Did you have any more you wanted to add on this? Or
no, I think once again, I mean, the Uranus being in the picture just made this a very special Venus retrograde. The co-presence with Jupiter, so it really was. I mean, this was the summer of gay marriages.
Right.
The Supreme Court had just had approved it, so there really was this liberated and very confident period. I mean, it's very different now, 8 years later, but you can see it all emerging. And then just again to reinforce the fact that she has natal Saturn square Venus. So yeah, it's Venus retrograde going through her 10th. Yeah, it's Venus retrograde configured with these other planets, but it's also configured in a square to Saturn.
Now,
and her marriage is ending, and she's, there's a lot of endings and beginnings going on.
Right. I also think it's quite interesting that although she received a lot of, plaudits for, everything that, there were a lot of good things that came out about the sort of increased period of exposure in the summer of 2015. We also know that, interestingly,
not everyone was friendly.
She skews conservative, so she ends up so in a very kind of interesting, funny twist. She sort of ends up sort of alienating in many ways people who otherwise would be strong allies because of her support for like Republican politicians, but then also isn't really accepted on the right either because she's trans.
She's a trans woman.
So you can see both malefics in her chart are in which house?
The 11th.
Right. Of friendships and alliances. So,
and I gotta say, I mean, speaking of that malefic, like Venus did station retrograde on her Mars,
right?
And I mean that, like, it's just very literal, right? She's gone from one gender to another.
I mean, it didn't happen obviously on a particular day. I mean,
No,
it was, this has been a process decades in the making.
but yeah,
Um,
that it came to this kind of
right, but that it came to
public
this kind of public,
yeah,
present,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Sorry for talking over you this whole
No,
time.
that's okay. That's all right.
um,
It's always going to be one of us will get complaints. Since I got the last complaint about talking over you, you're due to get the next complaint for
yeah,
talking
I
over me.
guess, yeah, it's my turn. So really, in essence, the idea of the social consensus reorganizing. I mean, it seems like one big thing we could say about the Venus retrograde of 2015 was that it reorganized the social consensus in favor of LGBT rights and celebration and embrace of um LGBT persons and issues,
Yeah,
and therefore, yeah.
yeah,
Um,
very cool.
so
Excellent,
yeah, I think that's a pretty good
excellent
one.
example. Excellent example. All right, on to the 11th house,
We're
and
almost all the way through. All
yeah,
right.
yeah,
It only took us 2 hours. Um,
yeah.
so
Yeah, that's the thing. I have a client at 1:45, so we've got like 45 minutes to do the rest of the
all
houses.
right, yeah. Well,
But I think we can do it. We can
yeah,
do
I
it.
think we can do it. I think we can do it.
All right. So,
So the 11th house is the house of alliances, the house of friendships, is the house of groups that we're a part of, and our relationship to groups, I think, especially is implicated by Venus retrogrades in the 11th. What would you have to say about that, Nick?
yeah, it's your clan, it's your gang, it's your peeps. It's your team. Let's put
Mhm.
it that way.
So returning to the theme of me talking about people and things that I don't really know anything about. um
Likewise, this dude is
I
so famous. I know
I
his
am not.
name,
I know
but
his name. I don't know anything else about him really.
I know he's very good at what he does.
He throws balls. That's pretty much it.
He
I don't think
plays
he
the
does
sport
anymore. I think
ball.
he's retired now. But yeah, so
Yeah.
Tom Brady, um so here's what happened to him in 2015, and here's why I think it really makes sense with the 11th house. So there was this, if you can call it a controversy, this controversy in
Do we have a
football in
specific date?
2015. Huh?
Do we have a specific date?
So yeah, on May 11th, 2015. So I have to start the story a little further back before we get to
Okay.
the retrograde. May 11th, 2015 is when Brady was suspended by the NFL for supposedly tampering with the footballs. This is this controversy called Deflategate, where
Oh, yes.
um, they thought that they were intentionally manipulating the amount of air in the balls to make them harder for the other team to catch or something. I'm not exactly sure, but it has to do with deflated balls and men grabbing them forcefully. So,
Right. As opposed to
so
2016 when they'd be known for grabbing other
well,
things.
no, no.
No.
So somehow Brady got implicated in this, and so he was suspended on May 11th, 2015. You can see like Mars is just about to enter his ninth and oppose his Saturn there. So this
Transiting Saturn.
suspension was being kind of investigated. Like during the suspension, it was being investigated as to whether they would uphold it. And so then we get to the Venus retrograde on July 28th, 2015.
Mhm.
It was announced that the NFL was going to uphold Brady's suspension. They did this whole investigation, and I guess in that time Brady like replaced his phone, and they thought he was trying to like get rid of texts that had information on it about like air pressure or deflating balls or whatever, and he said no. But so on July 28th, 2015, the NFL, the group, the team that he's a part of, basically said, no, we're going to keep you out of, of playing. And so he responded personally, on social media saying, I'm very disappointed by the NFL's decision to uphold the suspension, and I won't allow my unfair discipline to become a precedent for other NFL players without a fight. So, the organization that he'd been part of for years now as like one of the star players in football, was there was a reorganization of his relationship with that organization, right? They
Mm.
turned against him, and his connection with them was changing. It was turning sour. They were now, his opponents. And I think it's interesting too on a natal level that he has the Sun and Saturn in the 11th. So he's both known as like the star player, but also censorship.
Yeah.
And so just to continue the story, or to finish the story, so this went on through the retrograde. A federal court vacated the suspension on September 3rd, 2015. So over the course of the retrograde in Leo is when he's battling back against this suspension and it being upheld. So it took a federal court to like intervene in this over deflated balls. And again, it just seems kind of stupid. But anyway, so the federal court said like, no, actually, this wasn't fair to Brady, and like he should be part of it again. And then like it eventually was like reinstated in 2016. So it was just this giant mess that didn't get resolved at that time. But I think the fact that the Venus retrograde happened in his 11th house during the time frame when the suspension was upheld, and
right,
this was the defining point of his changing relationship with this organization that he previously,
The really interesting thing here is look at this double sextile. He's got this Jupiter-Venus conjunction Gemini to Cancer that makes a perfect sextile to the Jupiter-Venus retrograde on July 28th, on the day that the NFL says no.
Right. Well, also
isn't that interesting?
Well, also look where Mars is.
Yeah.
So close to his midheaven as he's, suffered this major setback.
Squared by Uranus.
Right. Yeah. I don't know enough about like the details of it beyond this to intelligently comment, but that's the basic idea.
I know he went back to throwing balls and kicking balls.
Yes, at least for some amount of time after that, he continued to kick balls. But I think it's important though. The astrological significance of this is simply that if you were looking at this person's chart for the year 2015 and you were trying to figure out what was going to be happening with them, you would have been able to say, well, a Venus retrograde is happening in your 11th house. This is going to be, potentially like challenging social situations involving the groups that you're a part of.
Yeah.
And that kind of interpretation would have made sense. For a regular person with Libra rising, you could say something somewhat similar, that Venus retrogrades in Leo should be about kind of reorganization of the social consensus that you have with friends or the groups that you're a part of, and how you identify with them or not.
Yeah.
And so my next example, is another person who kind of bore this out in a very dramatic way.
I'll have her up in just a moment. Go ahead. Start talking.
Rachel Dolezal, if you remember her, she was the woman who basically
she was the president of the Spokane chapter of the NAACP.
She was president
of the local chapter.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know if she was president or if she just had some other position.
That's what I remember reading, that she was president of the Spokane chapter. Anyway, we can. So
basically, the truth, or there was a controversy because her parents basically said, actually, she's presenting herself as black, but she actually is white, and so this obviously caused a massive controversy because people accused her of extreme cultural appropriation.
What transit are we looking at?
So she resigned on June 15th, 2015 from the NAACP. So I presume that the news came out shortly before this, and we can see this is...
I remember it being a story. I was at Norwalk at the end of May, and I remember people were talking about it. So it had to be at least 2 weeks earlier. I think she hung on to the job for quite a while.
And then the Spokane City Council voted unanimously to remove her from her position as chair of the Police Ombudsman Commission shortly thereafter as well in June. So the Venus retrograde, Venus was like gearing up to go retrograde in her 11th house at a time when she was like losing all of her alliances, losing the support of people who she had previously been a part of the team on.
Right.
And
I remember that the thing was, like, it turned out she'd been like pretty good at the job too, so that like when she left, it wound up,
right. I mean, that was kind of the odd part is,
yeah,
it wasn't like she was bad. She just, had
she was,
presented herself more,
yeah,
in a, well,
but she was pretending to be something she
in
wasn't.
a more
Yeah,
deceptive way. Yeah.
yeah,
So, yeah, this is kind of when, this will happen. We can see that the Sun Mars conjunction was moving out of her ninth and moving towards her midheaven. Naturally, this is a pretty intense period of
yeah,
scrutiny, from all sides
yeah,
of her. And now the fact that Jupiter is in the 11th is interesting because at first glance we might go like, oh, that's probably, I wouldn't expect this to be bad. But look what planet she has in the 11th. Just like Caitlyn
yeah,
Jenner,
yeah, yeah,
she
yeah,
has Mars
yes,
and
yeah,
Saturn in the 11th, right? So
yeah.
even good transits going through houses where you have
This
like
just
malefic
exposes her.
planets.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, this
yeah.
is not necessarily going to improve her basic situation, which is that she has a natal disposition towards like achieving somewhat respectable positions within organizations and also experiencing um you know uh great
Discord,
divisions and
yeah,
problems and discord
with it,
with
with her people, or the people that she's
severances.
pretending to be her people.
Well, and we might also see this in terms of like her relationship in some ways with whiteness as a kind of group.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
That she felt like this is something she didn't identify with.
Yeah,
And
with the, it's true with the natal Mars and Saturn, just that the fact that she would, you know, disavow her race, I suppose is the way to put
right,
it. Like
right.
yeah, yeah, very
Someone
interesting.
just mentioned that it's a nocturnal chart and Saturn is square Saturn. I think that's also very
Yeah,
relevant because
yeah.
Saturn rules her fourth house, her parents, and it was her parents who were the ones who, kind of
Yeah. And this Saturn also, the Saturn retrograde had been in Sagittarius, so it had gone to that
right.
Mercury, which is her 12th house Mercury, like, yeah, in May when she's actually, oh, sorry, that's March, but leading up to it, like, this is Saturn had been on her Mercury, the
Hmm.
ruler of the 12th, and you get the sense that like that's when secrets are going to be exposed and that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. So I thought that was an interesting 11th house example that
Great
the Venus
example. Great
Venus
example.
retrograde is about. Yeah. Her
And I love the thing, both her and Caitlin having that Mars Saturn in the 11th, and just how it just
no
testifies to
friends on
yeah,
any side,
yeah, like,
like because conversely, Kim Davis like had a lot of obviously detractors,
but support as well. Like,
but huge support
oh,
though.
she's a hero to some people. Yeah,
Yeah, to some
yeah,
people they see it, but like Caitlyn Jenner is someone who doesn't have
yeah,
too many friends on
right.
any
Like,
side,
yeah, yeah,
and same with Rachel Dolezal. They're both
yeah.
people who must struggle more with that. So I thought those interesting points of comparison.
Fantastic. Well
Um,
done.
so now we have just two more examples
Two
to
more.
go through
Okay.
and
So,
to go through the final house here.
all right, hold on. I'll put up your example. Just give me a moment. And funny enough, both our examples start with the letter U. I don't know what,
Right.
no special meaning to that. There's nothing about the 12th house that makes it. Today's episode of the 12th house is brought to you by the letter U.
Right.
Okay. Just a moment. Yeah. Well, go ahead and
Okay,
introduce it,
yeah.
and
I'll
I'm about to have your.
warm up the crowd. I'll open for you. So Uma Thurman was born with Virgo rising. So Venus retrogrades in Leo happen in her 12th house. And so the 12th house is the house of enemies and the things that sort of work against us and the people in some ways who are not like on our side. And we've already spoken before about how Venus in a bad house, especially the 12th or the 8th, can reflect like admirers who like it's like disordered pleasure, right? Or disordered versions of social connections. So Venus in the 12th house can be like having a attention and affection, but from someone you don't want. So it's like a stalker, an admirer who you don't want to have. Unwanted attention is maybe a theme we might be able to say about Venus in the 12th. And so kind of similar to the Gigi Hadid example, Uma Thurman was dealing with this stalker, Jack Jordan, for quite a while, but he wasn't arrested until October 5th, 2007, which was in the aftermath of the Venus retrograde that occurred in Leo in her 12th house, as his pursuit of her had been intensifying. In fact, in August of 2007, when Venus was actually retrograde, she was on vacation in the Bahamas, and she said that she felt physically nauseous because her personal assistant called her to say that a man named Jack Jordan had come to her front door and was ringing the doorbell and refused to leave, and that he only left after she told him she was calling the police. And this guy's just obsessed with her and wants to come after her. And so so that was going on through August, and then he finally wasn't stopped until October 5th, 2007, which was still in the red 5, but is after Venus station retrograde. So we just see it was like a heightened period of activity from a person who had a kind of unhealthy obsession with her. So I think that's a pretty good Venus retrograde in the 12th house type story, that they were finally caught.
For sure.
The 12th house is also imprisonment.
Yeah. And she's the only person we're talking about today that I've met.
You've met Uma Thurman?
I sold her a Christmas tree, Christmas of 1998, when she was with what's his name, her husband,
Ethan Hawke.
Ethan Hawke, yeah. So it was her and Ethan.
So you met Ethan Hawke too?
Yeah, but not just that. I met 3 celebrities because they had their newborn baby. It's that great Christmas where you have a newborn baby, and that baby is now on Stranger Things, right? What's her name? Their child. Maya Hawke was an infant. So yes, I sold them a Christmas tree in New York City, Christmas of 1998. Ethan, Uma, and their brand new baby, who is now also a celebrity.
Scorpio rising.
Okay. Yeah. We have her data. Yeah. So anyway, that's just my little aside. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, that's really interesting. That's cool.
That's all. Sold her a Christmas tree. They were very happy with it. It was a beautiful tree, a Douglas fir. Wow. Yeah, they in New York City, they always get Canadians to sell Christmas trees on the street. It's like a New York thing. Everyone knows.
I see.
So, usually French Canadians, but since I'm from Quebec, I qualified.
So if you have Virgo rising, then I think we might be able to say that it's a time when either you might be on the receiving end of attention from someone that you might not necessarily want, but I would also not completely discount the possibility that it could happen the other way as well, where maybe you have
secrets that
an obsession with someone that can't be fulfilled, or that is unreciprocated, or is somehow like an improper type of fixation or desire to have for someone.
Just like how I feel about you, Watson.
And I hope I'm not being terribly offensive by saying that if you've had wonderful relationships occurring with Venus retrograde in your 12th house, but I would think there would be something that is somehow, there would be something a little off, about it, I would think.
Yeah, look, it can have to do with on a more personal level, with just the stuff that is from your very private world, from your own secret world. And sometimes it can be exposure as well. It wouldn't surprise me in other instances, because she has Venus close to the midheaven there in the 10th square the ascendant, that the 12th house can manifest in different ways. In this case, it was a stalker, but it could come out in different ways as well.
Right. Well, I mean, I think of, enemy is kind of a weird word to use because we don't always use
Yeah,
that word enemy very casually. But I think stalker, though, everyone knows what that is. That is definitely a 12th house type figure to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So
do you want to
last
give
one?
us our last one?
Let's go to our last one. Our other letter U person. Sorry, let me share the screen. I almost did my classic forgot to share the screen thing. Did I tell you I was someone's mentioning Siegfried and Roy, October 30th, 2003. Yeah, but the Siegfried and Roy, the tiger attack, it was October 2003, which is not a Venus retrograde, so we're not talking about them today. Some other time. I'm all about talking about tiger attacks. So our other letter U, Uma Thurman to Usher. Yeah, Usher is a red 2. Usher was born just before Venus went retrograde. He's been in the news lately because he's trying to break up marriages. Have you heard about this?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
he's got this 12th house thing. But here's the thing. Usher has been married twice. The first time he was married, he married his stylist, and there was a wedding planned for July of 2007, but it was canceled. And then there was a small ceremony, I think it was August 7th of 2007, and then a big ceremony on September 1st, 2007. And shortly after that, she gave birth to his oldest son. She had 3 kids from a previous, like one she had her first child as a teenage unwed mother, and then 2 children from her previous marriage. So he was also becoming a stepdad, but their child was born right around this time. Saturn rising, very classic for stepdad, or for Saturn to be involved.
Well, Saturn's also ruling the 5th house as well.
Right. And sorry, I'll just finish the thought.
Sorry. Of course.
So this is his first marriage, and this eventually ended in divorce. And then he secretly got married to his second wife. Sometime, it was literally a secret wedding that was only announced in December of 2015, but the wedding itself happened in August of 2015. So both times he's gotten married has been when Venus has been retrograde in his 12th. And both times, like, I'm not sure why the first marriage was, the first wedding, like I said, it was canceled. Then a month later, there was one ceremony, and then the other.
Yeah, there's a story there that we're not
there's some
to.
There's some kind of 12th house thing going on there. Maybe it was because she was pregnant, but she wasn't that pregnant just yet. I think she had the child in November. But for whatever reason, there was that. And then the second wedding in 2015 was literally a secret wedding.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, some people might go like, that seems like a strange thing to happen in the 12th house. And I would say, yes, but check out where the ruler of the 7th house is.
Yeah.
The ruler of the 7th house is Jupiter.
Sorry, yes,
in Leo.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say just that. Exactly. The fact that Jupiter is the planet there and it rules the 7th. Exactly. That's why it's weddings, because Jupiter is there. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a really great example, and I think it's so funny, like you said, very recently Usher's been kind of trending for kind of trying to
he's like the kissing bandit or something,
trying to break up other people's relationships.
You better stay the hell away from my wife. That's all
he's got saying. He's definitely got that Venus retrograde going on in his natal chart. He's kind of got some of those vibes.
Oh yeah, big time. He's a big time Venus retrograde guy.
He was always
I know
like ultimate, like kind of smooth, charismatic, R&B star, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, he's everything. I mean, he was
dancer, singer.
Yeah, and he was a young guy. He won Star Search, or he didn't win Star Search, but he was discovered on Star Search when he was 13, which was 1991. I don't know if it was during the summer of 91 during the Venus retrograde, but yeah, like, I mean, I remember when he was coming up, he had that kind of Michael Jackson vibe to him that no other performer has had since Michael Jackson. Just this sort of like superstar, all round, the dancer, singer, all round performer kind of guy, impresario kind of thing. Kanye used to open for Usher. I mean, that's where the hierarchy goes. You know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah, he's a total Venus retrograde, and 78. I always have I love 1978 for the Venus retrograde because you get this
Uranus thing.
the Mars and the Uranus. That the 1978 was a very sort of kinky, wild, Venus retrograde. A lot of crazy stuff going on. So sometime I could do a whole episode just about the red two of 1978.
That's really, thank you for pointing that out, because I just realized one of the other kind of distinguishing features of this particular Venus retrograde is the fact that it's going to be square Uranus.
Yeah.
So this is like the Venus retrograde that if you have like a Venus Uranus aspect in natal chart, especially a conjunction or square or opposition, you're probably going to really resonate with or interface well with this Venus square Uranus, which will prompt you to seek more novel or occasionally boundary breaking Venusian experiences of pleasure and social interaction.
Right. Remember, the one in 2015 was trine Uranus, and now we have the square, so it's a very different kind of dynamic. But definitely, I mean, both of them connect the two planets and have them interacting and doing the thing they love to do.
Yeah.
Wow. Absolutely. Wow.
So that is Venus retrograde through the 12 houses.
Amazing. We did it.
How much more time do we have, or we have to get going?
Yeah, I mean, I've got to prepare for a client.
Okay.
And but this has been a good run. I think our longest live stream so far, definitely our most organized and prepared.
Yeah,
maybe we should start preparing these things, Watson.
Well, every so often, I think if we, if there's like a particular topic we want to cover or that anyone would like us to talk more about in a more prepared way, then I think we can do that. I don't know that I would want to do that every single week, but I think
it was a lot of work. Well done. Thank you for putting everything
no worries.
together.
But when we want to, I would love to answer more questions about any other questions you have about Venus retrograde. But if we gotta get going, then maybe we can set that for another time. The Venus retrograde is still coming. So
and
we'll have another week.
Even that astrology podcast guy, that pesky astrology podcast guy, is saying good job, guys. So
wow,
he's really hard to please. So
well,
if he says it was good,
then, actually, I'm thankful to him because
this was his idea.
Chris, suggested that we do this.
Like most good ideas, they come from Chris Brennan.
Yeah,
we are mere vessels for his good ideas.
Yeah, the pattern with Chris and me and ideas is that he'll go like, oh, I have an idea, you should do this. And I'm like, that will never work. And then he ends up having a lot of success with that idea. And then I'm like 5 years too late. That's been the pattern so far. So I've been trying to learn to like listen to what he's saying.
He knows what he's doing. He thinks these things through. He is, as someone on Twitter said recently, he is the god of astrology. I think we have to accept that.
Yeah. Point in his direction and pray 5 times a day. All right. Alrighty.
All right.
Yeah.
Love you, Chris. Love you, everyone. And look, maybe next week we make it, a real Q&A type of episode because we're kind of cutting out now before we can take a lot of questions. Last night, Barbie was released in 1959 in March. That chart's going around. I've had it in my database for a long time, but a lot of people are talking about that. March of 1959 is when the doll came out.
If you have, I would say, for next week, if you have questions about how, it's looking in your own chart or in the chart of someone in your life and you want to, if you're okay giving the details of the chart, I'm happy. I think we would probably be happy to look at some of those more individual cases, and obviously we can't go into too much detail, and
we don't want to do we don't want to do chart readings on the live stream.
But I mean, I think we can still answer some general questions about some of the more specific features. But
all right,
we'll strike a balance.
we'll just general questions. I also just like to hear from astrologers who are wrestling through with concepts on a more abstract level. Barbie was released in March of 1959, and then Ken came out in March of 1961. Ken is the Venus retrograde in that pairing. And what could be more Venus retrograde than being born with, like, you know, nothing in the junk? All
That's
right.
yeah, that's interesting.
No, it's not. It's stupid.
Oh, I was just about to look up
About,
Ryan Gosling's birth data, but it's a C-rated time, so I don't know if it's trustworthy or not.
yeah, no, these Canadians and their wobbly birth times. All right. Well, yeah, we need to cut out. I got to prepare for my client.
All
But
right.
folks, thank you everyone for tuning in. Patrick, who are you? Where can you be found?
I am Patrick Watson. I'm an astrologer, and you can find me at patrickwatsonAstrology.com and pwatsonastro at most social media sites.
And I can be found at nickdaganbestastrologer.com and also on YouTube. I make videos. And tomorrow I'm doing my solo live stream. I'm going an hour earlier than usual. We're starting at 10 a.m. And I've got a special guest, Sam Reynolds, my friend Sam Reynolds. And we're going to talk about Venus retrograde and the history of race relations in the United States based on an article I wrote 16 years ago during a Venus retrograde in Leo, and kind of updating it. Sam was asking why I hadn't talked about it on the Astrology podcast. And I said, well, I was thinking about doing it on a live stream. You want to join? And so he is. So Sam and I are going to do that together. So yeah, tomorrow, 10 a.m. Pacific time, which is 1 p.m. Eastern. So an hour earlier than I usually do the live stream, or that, you know, that Patrick and I also do the live stream. So tune in tomorrow for that. And
I
other
think
than
I'll
that,
tune in for that.
great. And then next Sunday, Patrick and I will be back. All right, folks.
Thank you.
Have yourselves a great Sunday. Have yourselves a great week. I hope
See you
to see
next.
you
Bye,
tomorrow on my
everyone.
solo stream. Thank you, Watson. Be well. See you soon.